Coming up on this Thursday edition of Daybreak, the eldest son of the de facto owner of the sunken Sewolho ferry has been put on the most wanted list. Lawmakers slam the government for its poor response to the disaster. Korea and Japan kick off a two-day meeting in Tokyo today on Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Plus, the death toll from the mining accident in Turkey tops 270 and looks sure to rise even further. As rescue efforts continue, the Turkish government is facing protests over its failure to improve mine safety. Daybreak begins now. Hello and thanks for joining us, to our viewers in Korea and around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Thursday, May 15th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom and you're tuned in to Daybreak. We begin with the latest on the Sewolho ferry disaster. 5 more bodies were recovered on Wednesday, leaving 23 people still unaccounted for, almost 1 month after the ferry capsized. As well as the search operations off Jindo Island, the search goes on for those deemed most responsible for the tragedy. State auditors are also scrutinizing the government and Coast Guard response to the sinking. Kwon So-a starts us off.
There was a mistake with the numbers. The rescue operation is being carried out simultaneously by private and public authorities, so we are prone to making mistakes.
The way authorities have handled the Sewolho ferry disaster from the moment the boat started to experience problems has been the subject of harsh criticism. Nearly a month after that fateful day, state auditors have begun a special investigation into whether the government neglected its duties. The Board of Audit and Inspection has deployed a 50-person team to inspect the ministries and agencies responsible for the disaster response. These include the Ministries of Oceans and Fisheries, the Coast Guard, as well as shipping associations related to the sunken ferry. Auditors will focus on whether the government's response was appropriate and if rescue operations progress strategically. The construction, management, and operational procedures of passenger ships will also be scrutinized. Further on, the audit team will look into how the government is supervising safety measures. Meanwhile, prosecutors are looking into putting more pressure on Yoo Dae-gyun, the first son of the practical owner of the Sewolho ferry, Yoo Byung-on. They put him on their Class A most wanted list on Wednesday, 1 day after raiding his house, which means he will be arrested on the spot once he is found. There are concerns he may attempt to flee the country if he already hasn't. Prosecutors have summoned his father, Yoo Byung-on, for questioning on Friday, and they say they expect him to appear. Kwon So-a, Arirang News.
The nation's lawmakers are also looking to hold the government accountable for its poor response to the ferry disaster. For the first time since the sinking, lawmakers from the ruling and opposition parties had the opportunity to grill and lambast government officials. On Wednesday, Chae Yu-sun reports.
Lawmakers from both the ruling and opposition camps lobbed criticism at officials during a government report, saying their mismanagement of the accident led to its disastrous outcome. Jin Sun-mi of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy revealed details of a phone conversation between emergency operators and the Coast Guard in the early moments of the crisis. In it, the head of the emergency operator repeatedly asked the Coast Guard to bring the rescue to an area where high-level officials were standing by instead of an island closer to the accident site.
It's clear their priority was not rescuing the missing passengers, but showing high-level officials those who were already rescued.
In response to the accusations, the National Emergency Management Agency, in a written statement, said the request to send survivors elsewhere was made to speed up the medical treatment. Influential figures within the ruling Saenuri Party were also highly critical of the government. Accusing the government of being corrupt and lax, lawmaker Lee Jae-ho asked why it took officials an hour to first report the accident to the president. Lawmakers Heo Chung-won said Security Minister Kang Byung-gyu lacks crisis management abilities and should step down immediately.
This incident has put the nation in great shock and despair. To prevent a repeat of such an incident, we need to introduce a new law. No one in Korea will trust preventive measures put forth by public officials like you.
Seo added he would introduce a bill this week that calls for a probe into the causes of the ferry disaster, compensation for the victims and their families, punishment of those found responsible, and a reform plan to bolster national emergency response. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Now, in other news, senior diplomats from Korea and Japan will begin a second round of talks today on Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Seoul's foreign ministry says it will focus on proving the so-called comfort women were forced into sexual servitude and were not, as some in Japan claim, working as prostitutes. Not much progress was made at the first meeting in Seoul last month. The Korean government intends to use letters released by the Chinese government in March that prove the women were forced to work in Japanese military brothels. More than 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve Japanese troops in the early 20th century. Tokyo claims the issue was settled through a 1965 treaty when the two countries normalized diplomatic ties. There are, however, concerns Japan might want to focus more on other issues during the talks, like Korea's import restrictions on Japanese fisheries or Tokyo's moves to boost its military presence. Washington's top nuclear negotiator on North Korean affairs says the US government is in close contact with Beijing when dealing with North Korea issues. Speaking at the Center for Strategic and International Policy in Washington this week, Glyn Davies said North Korea is always one of the main topics of conversation during his talks with Chinese officials. He added Beijing is well prepared for a possible provocation by North Korea and has plans of its own to firmly deal with a variety of emergency scenarios on the Korean peninsula.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
Korean shares ended at their strongest closing level this year on Wednesday, fueled by robust foreign capital inflows, foreign buying. Propelled by a rise in foreign buyers of tech and auto shares, the Kospi closed at just around 2,011 points. That's up nearly 28 points, or 1.4% from the previous day's close. It's the first time the index has broken through the 2010 mark since December 30th last year. Analysts expect the foreign buying to continue with more of a focus on automobiles and utilities. The Korean currency strengthened by more than 5% against the greenback on Wednesday, closing at just under 1,028 won. Now, Korea's labour market conditions continue to show signs of improvement with the addition of almost 600,000 new jobs in April. But it looks like the next round of figures will not be as hot since the negative effects of the Sewolho ferry disaster will have to be factored in. Hwang Jie has this report.
The Korean economy added more than 580,000 jobs in April from a year earlier, bringing the number of employed in the nation to over 25 million. It marks 2 straight months of slowing job growth, but Statistics Korea says the figure still points to an improvement in the nation's labor market. The agency said greater than expected jobs were generated in the first 2 months of this year because of a rise in consumption prompted by the Lunar New Year holiday. The number of new jobs last month is also much more than the average number of jobs added each month last year, which was below 400,000. Some of the major job-creating sectors last month were related to the retail and health and social welfare industries. The jobless rate for those aged 15 to 29 stood at 10% in April, up 0.1 percentage points from March. The agency points out that the impact of last month's sunken ferry disaster was not reflected in the data and that it's expected to have a negative impact on the job growth this month. The government has cautioned that slowing consumer spending caused by the disaster could hurt the nation's economic recovery. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And with the government's failure to prevent the recent ferry disaster on the front of her mind, President Park Geunhye has reiterated the need for sweeping reforms in public service. The president, speaking at the National Academy of Sciences on Wednesday, said that materialism and opportunism are threatening national unity and trust. President Park then vowed to reform the public sector so that every member of society does his or her best and acts responsibly. The Korean leader is soon expected to make a public apology to the Korean people for the Sewolho ferry tragedy. Now, for the first time ever, Korea has put together a national balance sheet that gives a detailed breakdown of the country's economic structure all the way down to average household wealth. And it shows that the nation's total asset volume is maturing at a rate that competes with other advanced nations around the world. Our Shin Se-min reports.
Korea's national household wealth in terms of purchasing power is roughly 60% of that of the U.S. and 80% of Japan's. A report released by the Bank of Korea and Statistics Korea Wednesday shows Korea's national wealth or net asset as of 2012 stood at 10.6 quadrillion won, or over 9.4 trillion U.S. dollars, 7.7 times that of the nation's gross domestic product. This is relatively high on the scale of national net asset to GDP ratio. France stands at 6.7, Japan at 6.4, and Canada at 3.5. When the nation's net asset is broken down to the individual level, it amounts to 207,000 U.S. dollars per person. The nation's wealth can be calculated by deducting debt from assets, and this is the first time that Korea has drawn up a figure for a balance sheet based on international standards. The latest figures prove that the nation's economic structure has matured to the level of developed countries. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
A U.S. court has thrown out an appeal by Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics to revise a patent that was handed down in Apple's favor. The United States Courts of Appeal said Wednesday that it agreed with the International Trade Commission's ruling last June, which said Apple did not infringe on 3 of Samsung's patents. The court did not elaborate on its reasoning, however. The ICT, which is based in the US, had ruled that Apple infringed on 1 of Samsung's patents, which was not ruled upon on Wednesday, though. Apple devices with the technology were subject to import bans, but this was overturned by the White House last August. The Obama administration claimed the technology was covered by the Standard Essential Patent, which ensures devices made by different companies can communicate with each other. Staying with Samsung, Samsung Electronics has officially apologized and promised to compensate workers who died from or are suffering incurable diseases suspected to have been caused by the working conditions at its semiconductor factories. The tech giant, however, stopped short of admitting a direct link. Our Park Geunhye reports.
After years of denials, Samsung Electronics has offered an official apology to its former workers who are suffering from or have died from diseases allegedly brought on by their working environments. The tech giant's CEO Kwon So-a made the announcement on Wednesday, saying the company was sincerely sorry for having neglected the pain of the victims and their families and for not having settled the issue earlier. The company promised proper compensation and said it would abide by decisions made by an independent third-party panel of mediators. Samsung Electronics also vowed to check the safety of its semiconductor production facilities and to come up with concrete measures to prevent the recurrence of such incidents. The world's leading semiconductor manufacturer also vowed to withdraw itself from participation in all ongoing trials regarding cancelled compensation claims. The overall dispute came to light in 2007 when Hwang Yu-mi, a former employee at a Samsung semiconductor production plant, died of leukemia at the age of 23. Similar cases followed, with employees dying of rare blood-related diseases. Family members attribute their exposure to chemicals at factories as the cause. However, Samsung had denied the claim and resisted offering an apology. While Samsung continues to deny a direct correlation between the diseases and the working environment at its plants, Wednesday's apology represents a change in attitude. The apology came about a month after Shim Sang-jung, a Progressive Party lawmaker, called on Samsung and the government to apologize to the more than 200 workers who developed rare cancers or died after working at semiconductor plants. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this morning. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news centre. Good morning, Eunice.
And good morning to you, Mark. Rescue operations continue as Turkey enters the third day of its mining disaster. Its prime minister says up to 120 workers are still trapped underground. The death toll has risen to 274. At least 88 workers are reported to have been rescued, though no additional survivors have been found in the last few hours. These figures put Tuesday's coal mine accident as Turkey's worst mining accident, surpassing the incident in 1992 when 263 lives were lost in a gas explosion. The Prime Minister's office has declared 3 days of national mourning in light of this disaster, but anger is erupting against Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Protesters also clashed with police in Istanbul and Ankara. The World Health Organization has concluded the spread of the potentially lethal Middle East respiratory syndrome is of serious concern, but does not constitute a global health emergency at this point. Also known as MERS, the virus causes coughing, fever, and sometimes fatal pneumonia. The virus has been confirmed in more than 500 patients, most of them in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, with a handful of cases from Asia, Europe, and the U.S. 171 people so far have died from the syndrome. Japan's broadcaster NHK reports the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant could release groundwater into the ocean as early as the 21st or next Wednesday. It cited Tokyo Electric Power Corporation as saying the levels of cesium-137 and tritium in the groundwater were found to be below set standards at the Fukushima No. 1 power plant and thus decided to release the groundwater into the ocean. Relatedly, U.S. Ambassador to Japan Caroline Kennedy visited the crippled nuclear plant on Wednesday and pledged U.S. support for the Fukushima nuclear cleanup. And finally, the who's who of the film industry have descended upon the French Riviera to attend the 67th Cannes Film Festival. A curated selection of 18 films will be screened for the top prize, the Palme d'Or. The opening the prestigious festival was the film Grace of Monaco, directed by Olivia Daun and starring Nicole Kidman as the European princess Grace Kelly. The festival will run for 11 days.
Well, I left because I fell in love with the charming prince.
And good morning, everyone. As we start things off with the biggest news on Wednesday, as Park Ji-sung held a press conference at the Park Ji-sung Football Center in Suwon. And while there were speculations, little did we know that he was ready to say goodbye to the sport. Now, with his parents and fiancée on hand, Park Ji-sung stated that he had played his last match as a professional football player and will now retire from the sport. He added that his ongoing knee pain is the reason for his retirement and that he had already made his decision back in February. Now, Park, who led the South Korean national team to a fourth-place finish back in 2002, has long been touted as one of the best Asian footballers of all time. And moving on to Park Ji-sung's press conference. This press conference didn't get as much attention, but nonetheless, many wanted to know what badminton stars Lee Yong-dae and Kim Ki-jung had to say about their return. Now, with the press conference taking place at the Taeneung National Training Center, they talked about how they felt during their suspension and stated that they didn't know how they're going to spend the year without competition. But they added that the fans around the nation gave them continued support and was about to continue their condition training throughout the entire time. Meanwhile, they're also set to compete in their first competition of the season in New Delhi. And now moving over to the second leg of the round of 16 AFC Champions League matchup between FC Seoul and Kawasaki, with FC Seoul up 3-2 in aggregate. And despite taking the lead in the first half, they lost 2-1 at home. But thanks to those 3 away goals from the first leg, FC Seoul advances to the round of 8. And now with that, moving over to some Wednesday night's KBO action, the Samsung Lions were able to crush the Hanwha Eagles 10-3, with the LG Twins hanging on to beat the Lotte Giants once again 2-1, and the Tucson Bears offense comes alive once again to beat the SK Wyverns 12-2. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the Kia Tigers take on the NC Dinos. Of course, going into the game here, first inning of the game, Brett Pill sends this one to right. A sac fly gives the Kia Tigers the early 1-0 lead. But the bottom of the inning with 2 men on, Eric Thames drills this ball to deep right center field. Going, gone. A 3-run shot, and the NC Dinos have the lead 3-1. Fifth inning, this time we go over to Kim Joo-hyung at bat. This one, an RBI single to right, cuts the deficit to 3-2. Before this next play here, an infield single to second base by Lee Jong-hwan. This scores another, and we're tied 3-3. Fast forward to the 8th inning, game tied 5-5. Here's Na Sung-bum with 2 men on, and he crushes this pitch to deep right center field. No doubt about it, a 3-run shot, as the NC Dinos would hang on to win this game 9-5. And now finishing things off and staying in baseball, but over in the majors, where last year's National League Rookie of the Year, Jose Fernandez of the Miami Marlins, will be out for the rest of the season due to Tommy John surgery. Now, according to the team official, the Miami Marlins ace has a significant tear in his right elbow, and the team doctor recommended that he has the season-ending Tommy John surgery. Meanwhile, ligament tears in the elbow is becoming a huge problem in the major leagues, as many young pitchers are going through the Tommy John surgery. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Well, the warmth will continue to stick around for southern provinces, with highs hovering into mid to upper 20s, while the Seoul metropolitan area will notice cooler highs today. And rain is expected in the northern parts of Gyeonggi-do province and some regions in Gangwon-do province, but the precipitation should be less than 5 millimeters. And as we can see, most parts of the region is waking up to partly to mostly cloudy skies, but it should turn into sunny as the day progresses. Well, over in Jindo, winds and waves will remain calm today, and waves will be as high as 1 meter, but the currents in the water will be stronger as the spring tide starts today. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The morning low here in Seoul is starting out at 13, and the high will rise to 22, while Daegu will peak at 28, and Gwangju and Busan both should climb to 26 later in the afternoon. Now, for other regions, down on Jeju and Daejeon will reach 21 and 24 later in the day. Dokdo should see a high of 22, while Mount Keungang tops out at 13. Well, that's all for now, but I'll be back with more updates after 10.
Thank you very much, Jion, for the weather there. And those are the stories we have for you at this hour. Korea Today is coming up in about half an hour's time, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.